In the 1970s, a boy named Andre McCollins went to school. He didn't know his day would turn into a nightmare. He was strapped to a chair and shocked 31 times as punishment. This is real life, not a movie. Today, we show you some of the darkest secrets in schools. You won't believe what happened. Schools should protect kids, but in many cases, they didn't. Kids faced pain, segregation, and even death. In this video, we will show you the worst practices in school history, where fear took over learning. Let's start with Andre McCollins. In 2002, he was at the Judge Rotenberg Center. It was a school for kids with special needs. One day, he refused to take off his jacket. The staff held him down and shocked him. He was shocked 31 times over hours. It left him with trauma. A video of the event was made public and people were shocked. This sparked lawsuits. Many schools stopped using shocks after this, but some kept doing it for years. This was seen as normal for a long time. But shocking wasn't the only punishment. Beatings were common too. In the UK, the case of Michael McCullough was famous. In the 1960s, Michael was caned often by his teachers. One day, he was beaten so badly that he had to go to the hospital. His story helped to push for banning corporal punishment in British schools. In 1987, the law changed and teachers couldn't hit kids anymore. In the US, there's the famous case called Brown v. Board of Education. This case changed history. The Supreme Court ruled that it was illegal to have separate schools for black and white kids. But things didn't change right away. Many states refused to integrate schools. In Little Rock, Arkansas, the Little Rock Nine had to be escorted by the National Guard to get into their school. These were 9 black students who wanted an education. They faced angry crowds, insults, and even violence. This shows how hard it was to make schools equal. Let's not forget the residential schools in Canada. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission gathered stories from Indigenous children. These kids were taken from their families. One of the saddest cases is Chani Wenjack. Chani was 12 years old. In 1966, he ran away from his school. He tried to walk home over 600 kilometers away. He never made it. He died from hunger and cold. Chani's story shows how cruel these schools were. In the US, Ruby Bridges faced a different kind of trauma. In 1960, Ruby was the first black child to attend an all-white school in Louisiana. She was 6 years old. Every day, she was escorted by federal marshals. Crowds yelled at her, saying she didn't belong. She ate lunch alone. No other kids would sit with her in class. But Ruby kept going. She showed bravery in the face of racism. Ruby's story reminds us how deep racism was in the education system. The biggest shock in the history of schools came recently. In 2021, mass graves were found at former residential schools in Canada. In Kamloops, British Columbia, 215 bodies were found. These kids had died and no one had recorded their deaths. Indigenous families had talked about missing children for years, but no one listened. Now the truth was found. More graves were uncovered across Canada. The horrors of these schools were worse than people had known. Another case from the US that many remember is the Tuskegee experiment. This wasn't about schools, but it's related. In the 1930s, over 600 black men were lied to. They thought they were getting treated for bad blood. They were really part of a study to see how syphilis would spread without treatment. The men were not told the truth. They didn't get real education about their health. It wasn't until the 1970s that the truth came out. People were horrified, and the experiment was stopped. As we look at these cases, one thing is clear. Schools and other institutions were often used to hurt people, not help them. History has many lessons. The stories of Andre McCollins, Chani Wenjack, Ruby Bridges, and the children lost in residential schools teach us one thing. Education should help lift people up. It should never tear them down. Which of these stories shocked you the most? Tell us in the comments. Like and subscribe to hear more stories that matter.